Hi, Joe Cerrone. Today we're going to look at Chapter 1 from AutoCAD 2022. Getting started with AutoCAD. Our chapter objectives are to understand the X, Y, and Z coordinates of the system, to be able to define the location of drawing elements in a digital format in a CAD drawing file, understand why you should create drawings full size in the actual unit with AutoCAD, be able to start AutoCAD, recognize the areas of AutoCAD drawing editor and know the functions of each, be able to use many methods of entering commands, be able to turn on and off snap, grid, ortho, polar, and dynamic input, know how to customize AutoCAD for window screens to your preferences. So the coordinate system in AutoCAD is basically shown here, where the x-axis is horizontal and the y-axis is vertical. And they have the grid shown here, and then they're showing the coordinate locations of 2, 2 and 5, 4. And the way the coordinates are displayed is it's the x-axis first, and so we go 2 units over, 1, 2 in the x-axis, and then 2 units up in the y-axis, 1, 2. And that would be the first point of that line. And then the next point would be 5, 4, which would be 5 units over, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 4 units up, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so that's the coordinate system that we use. The z-axis is coming out of the screen in the vertical direction, and if you choose an isometric viewing option, you can then see where this coordinate would be located at x, y, and z. X-axis being 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and then the z-axis being 6 units in the vertical direction. Angles in AutoCAD are starting at the 3 o'clock position and go counterclockwise, with 90 degrees being at the 12 o'clock position, 180 degrees, and 270 degrees. And so as we start to work with our CAD system, we can basically take a look in model space here. And here's our x-axis and our y-axis. And then if I wanted to turn on my grid, I can select my grid and I can select my snap. If you push this little button right here, you can hide the menu bar, show the menu bar, and that'll give us the ability to go to things like tools, drafting settings, and to look at our snap and grid. Right now snap is enabled and grid is enabled as well. Drawing true size. When we draw things, we make them full size so that we can then be able to have accurate dimensions. And so the idea is to draw things full size in model space, and then we scale them in viewports in paper space and print them out. Because if we're looking at a floor plan like this that's full size, we're talking hundreds of feet or a considerable amount that would not fit on a paper. And so typically we'll scale these, and then we'll use an architectural scale to measure things. So for example, if you were going to put in a conference room table into a room, you would have a meeting with the facilities department to make sure that that table would fit through the door, and you would bring the blueprints for that room, and they would then go and measure and make sure that everything fits. And so we'll set up these different plot scales to be able to plot things at that scale, and then we'll use an architectural scale to measure those things. To start AutoCAD, you can just click on the icon, AutoCAD 22 English, and it'll start the software. When we begin a drawing, we have the main splash page. So if I go and take a look at my drawing here, I can go and select Window, Start, and you can see the history of the drawings that we've previously had, or that I previously worked on. As we look at the drawing interface, this is called the ribbon across the top. This would be considered a palette. Here's our graphics area. Here's the cursor, and this is the command line. So as we take a look at that, here's the ribbon. As we take a look at the ribbon, we have draw commands grouped together, things like line, polyline, circle, and arc, as well as some other commands like rectangle, ellipse, and hatch. And you'll notice also that they have these little arrows that give you these subcommands of similar commands. And so you have draw commands to create geometry. So for example, if I wanted to draw a square, I'm just clicking with the left button, and then I can hit escape to pick up the pencil. And so this is the text explanation of how these different drawing interface components operate within the AutoCAD system. And so the ribbon goes along the top and consists of tabs, panels, and tools. And you can customize these. Graphics area is where we do the drawing. Palettes are things that will pop up on our screen, like if we were to look at properties. And command line is where we can input commands. And so as we take a look at this interface here, here's our ribbon with our draw commands, and there's more commands too. In this down arrow, you can pin these if you want. Things like creating splines and points. Here's our modify commands, things like being able to erase. If I wanted to erase one of these lines, I could click on it and then right click or hit enter. I can undo that. If we wanted to look at a palette, something like a modify palette, what I can do is I can go and I can say properties. And here is the command line. So you can type everything in. So for example, if I typed in properties, what it will do is give you a content sensitive command structure. And so if you don't know how to spell the command, you can start to type it. And what it will do is give you all the commands that begin with those letters. And so if I say properties, this is what's called a palette. And if I were to click on one of these lines, what it would do is then give you the properties of that line. It'll tell you the color of it, which is blue, and it's by layer. Layers are how we organize our different drawing components. Things like dimensions would be on a dimension layer. Object lines would be on an object line layer. Center lines and hidden lines is part of the graphical language. The application menu, or the big red A, is in the top left-hand corner, and it will give you options like starting a new drawing, opening a drawing, saving, save as, import, export, publish, and print. And then the menu bar is this little arrow with the line above it, and that'll give you the pull-down menu with the words on it, because what CAD has done is they've kind of gone more towards these icon-based command structures, whereas the older versions used to be word-based. And so we can turn on the menu bar, and then you can see the different options, like for circle. And if I was to want to draw a circle within this, what I would do is I could either go to the circle command and choose things like center radius, and I could then choose the center point, and then as I move the mouse, the radius would be 1 inch. You can see it says angle 90. That's because I'm at the 12 o'clock location. If I were over at the 3 o'clock location, it's 0. I'm talking about the angular measurements, and so we have 0, 90, 180, and 270. And then when I click the left button on the mouse, it will put down that circle. If I wanted to draw a circle, I could also go to the draw commands from the pull down menu, and I could select circle, and I could also choose center diameter, and it works the same way. It's just the same way of doing something, or a different way of doing something, but it's the same command. Dialog boxes, things like layer properties here. As you can see, we have this dialog box and it's showing the different layers. We'll use layers primarily with title blocks. And so if I'm to work with a drawing like this of our plate drawings, we'll have different layers. And so we'll have a layer for the object lines, we'll have a layer for the border, we'll have a layer for the center lines, we'll have a layer that's created automatically called def points. We'll talk about that a little bit later. A grid layer, it's off if I turned it on. Hidden line layer, and so if I invoke these different layers, I'll get different line types. And so when I draw on the hidden line layer, it comes in with hidden line types. And then I can click on that and I can erase that. Shortcut menus are used when we're within a command. If we right mouse click while we're in a command, it'll give you content sensitive line commands. Or if you're not in a command, it will give you default commands. So if I'm back here in my CAD drawing and I right click, it'll give me the last command if I want to repeat the center circle command, and then I can draw another circle. If I right click, I can go through and work with other commands like zooming, which would allow me to increase or decrease the magnification level. If I'm in a command like I'm in the circle command and I right click, then it will give me options for the circle command like 3 point, 1, 2, 3. And so these are just some examples of different menus that are available. Command entry using the keyboard. A lot of the old timers like myself will use the keyboard entry. And so if I wanted to draw, I could use the command entry, which would be things like I can type in the command line CIR and it'll start to show me the commands that begin with C. So I could draw a circle. I could draw a line, LIN. That's what's known as command entry rather than choosing it from the menu bar or from the ribbon. Escape key is your best friend. It will bail you out of a command. You want to keep an eye on the command prompt as you're working with your CAD drawings because it'll reflect back to you what the computer is looking for as far as input. And so while I'm creating different drawings, and if I'm going here and I'm creating a rectangle, you'll see that it was reflected here in the command line structure. And if I hit the F2 key, it'll give me the history of what I was doing with the CAD system. And so here's the rectangle command. It asks me for the first point of the rectangle and then the other point, and then these are what are known as options. And so you can have a rectangle with a chamfer, you can change the elevation, you can add fillets, change the thickness and width. And so as you start to work with it, it has a lot of efficient ways to work with the CAD system. So there's different ways to enter commands. You can use the keyboard and the command prompt like I was just showing where I typed in line and circle. You can use the menu bar. You can also use different tools and icons. And then there are shortcut menus that you can use by right-clicking and choosing those commands. And in this part of the textbook, what they do is they show you how to input those commands. And so it's kind of a wonky way of explaining it, but it works pretty well. if you start AutoCAD using the AutoCAD DWT template, what that is it's basically a default. And so if I go to CAD here and I start a new drawing, File, New, it gives me my choice of different templates. And so if I wanted to use the AutoCAD template, I can choose AutoCAD DWT and open that, and I'll just get a blank screen that's set up. If I wanted to use an architectural template, I can say New, and then I can choose like Inch Architecture, and I can open that, and it'll give me a frame for my drawing that I can then work in. And then it goes through, like I was showing, how to create a line by typing in line, and then you pick a point, pick another point, and press enter. And so as I work with this in this AutoCAD template, I can type in line, pick a point, and then here's what they talk about, the rubber band effect, and then I can pick another point. And you can just go through, and it stays in that command until you hit escape, or you hit the space bar, or you hit the right mouse button. And so these are all pretty much the same, where they're showing you how to type in these different commands. If you right click, you can repeat the last command. So if I come back here and then I right click, I can repeat the line command. And it's just sort of a shortcut. It's very efficient. It allows me to quickly create those drawings. The status bar is down here at the bottom. The status bar is like shortcuts, and this little button down here in the corner with the triple lines will allow us to toggle on these different glyphs for these different commands. And so when we look at our CAD system, this button right here will allow us to turn on and off these different commands down here at the bottom. And so coordinates is on, that's the coordinate display right here, X, Y, and Z. Model space, that means I'm working in an infinite drawing board that's called model space. If I zoom out, I can make it really, really small, or I can make features really, really very large. If I push the wheel on the mouse, I can pan things. It won't do it at this point because I'm in a command, but if I hit the escape key, I can. And so you can turn on these different modes. If I wanted to turn off my grid, turn it back on. If I wanted to turn on my snap, now when I create a line, it's going to snap to the grid, and it's more accurate. And so it gives you examples of how these grid mode works, paper space and model space work. Snap mode. You can also use the F9 key to turn snap mode on or off. Dynamic input is excellent. What that means is that the input will follow the cursor. And so as I'm working with this, if I type in line, this is dynamic input. It's on by default, but you can see that I'm able to type it in right wherever the cursor is. And then I can go into this line command and create these different lines. That's what's known as dynamic input. Ortho mode, and let me make sure I covered everything here. And so that's dynamic input. We won't do so much with infer constraints at this point. This is for us to be able to make things geometrically sound, like parallel, perpendicular, concentric, like you'll see in these parametric softwares like SolidWorks. Ortho mode means straight. And so when ortho mode is enabled, what we'll see is only straight lines. And so if I turn ortho mode on, and so if you hover over these different commands, you can kind of see what they're at. and then if I click on one, it will turn blue, meaning it's active. And with ortho mode on, that means orthographic, meaning the lines are just vertical or horizontal. Polar tracking is excellent. It's like a tape measure that gives you this green line that tracks out. It allows you to put in what's called direct distance measurements. So if I'm enabling polar tracking, that's this button right here, polar. I enable that. If I click on this, it allows me to set up the tracking angles. And if you've ever drawn with a pencil on a drafting board, they typically have the drafting machine work in 15-degree angles. And so you can click it 15, 30, 45, and 60. And so with polar tracking enabled, and when I draw a line, I can select the line command, click a starting point. You see this green line, it's tracking at 0 degrees. And then as I move the cursor, 15 degrees, 30 degrees, and then I can type in the distance. And so if I wanted to make a line 5 inches long, I can type in 5, enter, and then hit enter again. And then that line, if I hover over one of these grips, is 5 inches long at a 30-degree tracking angle. We'll talk about isometric drawing later in the chapters. Object snap is excellent. Object snap allows us to grab endpoints, midpoints, centers, and things like that. And so as we work with our drawings, when object snap is enabled, it's this one right here, OSnap, you can go through and you can have it set to acquire endpoints, midpoints, center points, whatever is checked off, it will gravitate to. So when I'm in a command like circle and then I hover over an endpoint, it reflects back with the glyph showing me that it's acquired an endpoint. And if I click on that, then that is perfectly set so that it acquires that endpoint at the center of the circle. Same thing with the line command. If I drew a line and then I hovered at this point by the midpoint, I can click and then that line will be at the midpoint. Snap sometimes gets in the way. I'm going to turn that off, and so I can then continue to create my geometry. Line weight is great. It allows you to make the lines thicker. And as we go through, I'm not going to go through every single one of these commands. It goes through quite a bit as we go through. But line weight is important. As we look at line weights, we can go through and we can set up different line weights. The best thing to do is to use an AutoCAD template from the D2L. And so if I were to go into D2L and look at the D2L content, and let me go in as a student. Alan and I have put all the title blocks in, and so you can select the title block. So for example, for the drawing that we're going to be using in our first lab, if I take the drawing title block, download that, and open it, it gives you a warning telling you that it's a student version. It'll be marked, which means that if you bring it to work, it'll always say student. So you have to be careful about using work drawings for student use because the student version is free and they mark it. And so here would be a title block. And then as I look at these different line types and layers, I have these different layers that are available. And then if my line types line weight is on, that would be this button right here, they'll show a little bit thicker. And so if I were to draw a square and hit escape, when I zoom in, you'll see that the line has weight to it, versus if I turn off the line weight, it's kind of harder to read. It's kind of thin. And so line weights are important as we work with CAD drawings. Transparency we won't use too much, but it essentially allows you to fade different drawings and layers so that they have different aspects of transparency. Selection cycling, being able to go through and select different objects. O-snaps is a good area that we would look at that, where you could grab an endpoint or a midpoint, you select and cycle through the different object snaps that you can work with. Dynamic UCS, we'll get into 3D later, we'll talk about that. Selection filtering, again, it's kind of an advanced topic. Gizmos are things like 3D move, 3D rotate, annotation and visibility. Annotation is a fancy word for dimensioning. Auto scaling, annotation scaling, workspace switching. These are pretty advanced concepts as we go through. They're just giving you some definitions. But as we go through and we start to work with the CAD system, you know, here's your function keys. F1 is an excellent key. You can hit F1 while you're in a command and it'll take you to the help screen. So if I'm not sure how to draw within a rectangle, I can go to the rectangle command, and then if I hit the F1 key, it will take me to the help screen, and then I can type in rectangle. Enter. And so it tells you how to draw a rectangle. You can click on that, and it will guide you with different ways to create rectangles. You can also hover over the command, and the longer you hover, the more content sensitive help that you will receive. And so here it shows the rectangle command. Point number 1 is the first click of the mouse. Point number 2 is the second. So if I go rectangle and then I click 1, 2, I'll get a rectangle. Text window, F2. Giving me my history of which commands I recently used. F3, object snap. You can either choose the cursor or choose the icon at the bottom, or you can type the F3 key. 3DO snap works in 3D. Basically, it'll acquire like centers of spheres, toruses, pyramids, things like that. Dynamic UCS we'll talk about when we get into 3D. Grid, you'll use that quite a bit. F7 is the shortcut, turns it on. F7 turns it off. Ortho, we demonstrated horizontal or vertical lines. Snap, this one you'll use quite a bit, probably the most. F9 turns it on and off, and that allows it to snap to whatever increment measurement we have. And so as we work with these drawings, especially for these plate drawings, we recommend that you have the snap on. And so with the snap on, I can go to Tools, Drafting Settings, and I can verify that my snap is on and my grid is on. And then as I go through and I draw these different components, I can go through and then draw this. And then as I go through, and I'll hit escape. And you can see I drew it on the wrong layer. I drew it on the hidden line layer. If I want to change that layer, I can select the geometry, and then I can change the layer up here. Layer 0, and this should be by layer. And then I can hit escape, and it'll create that geometry. AutoCAD text window, again, that's the F2 key. It kind of shows you which commands that you've used. I don't do a lot of search commands or inputs, so we'll kind of stay away from that. Model space and layouts, as we go through and we look at creating drawings and different things like that, things like floor plans. If I was to go back to my CAD system and pull up an architectural drawing, so here's a floor plan, and I'm on the architectural title block. Model space would be where I would create the drawing. You know, since this is a rather large drawing, it wouldn't fit on a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper because the wall is 17 feet by 18 feet. What we do is we draw that object in model space, and then on the layout in the viewport, we'll set up the scale so that we can then be able to measure that. So if I was to set that scale at something like 1/4 of an inch equals a foot, then when I print that out, we can measure that with an architectural scale. And so we can measure the printed copy of it. And I could make that a little bit bigger if I wanted to. A little too big. And that's what's really nice about the CAD system. When I first started working with drafting, I wasn't very good with keeping the paper free of eraser marks and pencil smears and things like that. And with CAD, it's very clean. It allows you to make changes very quickly, and you don't have any eraser marks or torn paper or things like that. And so as I set the scale and work with these different types of drawings, I can demonstrate those in these videos. Model space, you draw things full size, and then in the layout, we'll create that scale so that you can then set it so that we print it out like it shows here in the paper space, which would allow us to measure it on paper. And then toolbars are just another way of doing the same thing. Toolbars are kind of neat. It's sort of older interface type commands, and so if I went to Tools, Toolbars, AutoCAD, oftentimes I'll put like modeling toolbars on if I'm going to do any 3D type work. And then if I were to work in model space and wanted to create something like a sphere, I could create a sphere. Let's go to an isometric view. And we can also change the display conceptual. And so we can kind of see as we start to learn how to model things and work within the CAD system. Clean screen, it's just sort of like repainting the screen. Most of the graphics cards will do that automatically, so you don't really need to worry too much about that. Different options like being able to change the color of the background. This I will do, and so if I'm working on a CAD drawing and let's go back to a top view, we'll erase that. You'll notice that my background color is white. By default, it's black, and what you can do is you can right-click in the screen, go to Options. On the display, what they're showing you is this button right here, Colors. And so if I wanted to look at 2D model space and set it to the default, apply and close, okay. And it should have turned my screen black. I don't know why it didn't. Maybe if I use different drawing, I can go in there and work with that. And it might be because I was in a different perspective. But you can certainly go and change the colors. There we go. But it can work against you because certain colors display good against a black background versus white. And so I typically have my background set up as white because it's more like a piece of paper. And so I'll set these, and that way the colors contrast, like blue shows up good against a white background, etc. as we go through and we work with the interface. And you can choose any color you like. All right, that's the chapter 1 video tutorial. I'm going to end this meeting and post this video within the D2L content.